All right, here we are at the beginning of July. Happy Monday after the 4th of July weekend. I hope that you had a good one, didn't lose any eyes or fingers, and maybe found some new ways to celebrate this wonderful country of ours and its beautiful history. If not, I hope you got some time off and spent time with friends and ate some nice things and your home did not burn away or float away in a flood. I had a great weekend with friends. Myself, I'm in a partial staycation mode for a couple of days here on the podcast. So today I'll have your headlines and conversation with a very, very smart woman who went to Yale, MIT, Harvard, and later became a law professor at the University of California Law School. Fascinating, brilliant woman whose TED Talk on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I didn't even really get to with her, has been seen by millions. That's right. Professor Joan C. Williams joins me today. We spoke about her new book about how class and how the left lost the working class and how to win them back. Professor Williams is my guest today, and I think you'll like it. I learned a lot from her, especially if you look deeper into her books, her organization, her articles. So that's coming up. I don't have a clip show, just got some headlines coming up, but I do want to acknowledge what's happening in the world and invite you to a brief hangout tonight at 8 p.m. I don't know if I'll be there the full 2 to 3 hours this evening, but I do look forward to seeing you at 8 p.m. and it's not too hard to get me to stay. But I'm very, very happy to have you here today. And thank you very much for pressing play and for subscribing to the podcast. And I didn't mean to make a joke about people's homes floating away in the flood at the top. I'm just trying to set the perspective here because that is what happened to people in Texas. I'm not sure about how many homes were lost. I know some homes were lost in the fires in California, but certainly lives were lost in this horrible flood of the river in Texas. Thinking about anybody that knows anybody near or around there, but I've seen numbers from 79 to 84 across the state that are now dead. Rescue efforts are continuing, but it is a horrific situation there where 10 girls, I think, at least are still missing. If you haven't been paying attention to this, and I really wasn't too involved in the news because if I'm not doing the podcast, I try to punch out as much as I can. But now flooding, I'm now seeing a figure of at least 100 are dead, with these girls still missing. So that is probably the top story. I think it's got to be the top story over the weekend. And the secondary story is now officials slamming the National Weather Service for bad forecasts, and the agency, which was met with huge cuts, NOAA agency, by the Trump administration, and there were key roles that were vacant in offices in Texas. So all kinds of questions growing about blame and lack of warning, and what does this mean for the future of these types of storms and the public's interest in them or safety from them. Of course, the other big story, which is that on Friday, the quote, big, beautiful bill was signed into law, and it is going to be catastrophic for America, according to so many experts that I read, for so many reasons, including, just talking about, everybody thinks about the obviously debt and deficit that it creates, which is in the trillions, and the horrible healthcare cuts that it will create, which Larry Summers, who is not prone to the hyperbole of some of the rest of us, former Treasury Secretary, said hundreds of thousands of people will die as a result of the Medicaid cuts. That clip I will find and play for you from ABC's This Week. I thought that was pretty dramatic. But if it wasn't for those top line issues, the debt and the healthcare cuts, you would focus on the things a little bit lower down that aren't getting as much attention, but I would argue are probably going to create a lot more pain just in the future, and that is the clean energy getting pummeled. And not only how much money it would save you for buying a new EV or getting solar panels and all of these other incentives, but obviously what it is doing to disinvest on a large scale from renewable and clean energy and reinvest in old fossil fuels to the tune of billions and continue to incentivize them. So I'm very much concerned about that one, as well as the healthcare and the debt and deficit issues. And the other, I think, top line item is that it is investing billions more in hiring more people to kick out immigrants. I mean, another $350 billion being allocated for border and national security. ICE apparently will be receiving funding up to $10,000 signing bonuses to new employees with the aim of hiring 10,000 new officers and agents. So they're cutting healthcare, but they're hiring more ICE officers. $25 billion for the U.S. to develop its own Israeli-type Iron Dome missile defense system called the Golden Dome. And how's it all being paid for? On the backs of working people. Republicans cutting back on Medicaid and food assistance programs for those below the poverty line. Many adults receiving Medicaid and food stamps, including those up to age 65, will now have to fulfill an 80-hour-a-month work requirement. Medicaid patients will also now have a $35 copayment to contend with. It's about 71 million Americans use Medicaid. 40 million benefit from the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. The CBO estimates it at 11.8 million Americans will become uninsured by 2034, and 3 million more will not qualify for SNAP due to changes. It's just horrible. So that's the third other big story. I do love that Elon Musk and Trump are fighting again, and it's getting ugly again, really ugly. Elon, over the weekend, created his own new political party. I'm really looking forward to talking with folks about this at the Hangout and other places, because I think this is good that Elon Musk wants to do this. I think it's great when those two are fighting. I think that's very important, and I think that it is good for the country if Elon Musk is attacking Donald Trump and Republicans, and maybe it splits the idiot vote if there is an election in 2026, which the idea that there's going to be a free and fair midterm elections is becoming increasingly more disconcerting. But hey, at least Oasis has reunited. I bet you weren't expecting me to make a music reference, much less that one. But I'm looking for anything that brings people joy right now in these troubled, confusing, uncertain times. And they had their first concert in 16 years. And there was a lot of relief, apparently, seeing the Gallagher brothers walk on stage together, Liam's left arm draped over Noel's shoulder. These guys are their brothers. Apparently they were mad at it. I don't know. You all know. Many of you know, but I've seen that a couple times. It's cutting through even to me. It was a pretty big deal. So that's a good thing. What else can I tell you? Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting with President Trump in Washington today. So we'll probably hear more about their bromance. I wonder who's the top in that relationship. I wonder. We're going to hear probably more about tariffs. The Mad King is set to share new tariff rates this week as the deadline for deals approach. That was much of the conversation with what little I saw of the Sunday shows. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent trying to lie about what we're going to see. And, of course, Trump's trade negotiators, Steve Witkoff and Commerce Secretary Howard Nutlix, I mean, they're all out there trying to continue to make promises that they can't keep about these self-inflicted wounds they call tariffs. Apparently, core inflation rose more than 2.7% in May. The jobs payroll, U.S. payroll increased, though, 147,000 in June, which was more than expected, so the jobs report wasn't that bad. Oh, look at this. Tesla shares have dropped 7% in pre-market trading after Elon Musk announced he's launching a new political party. You hate to see it, everybody. California's largest blaze this year has exploded in size as hot weather is risking more wildfires statewide. We're keeping an eye on that. The Madre fire became California's largest blaze this year, ripping through grasslands after breaking out this past Wednesday in southeastern San Luis Obispo County. Fire has grown for more than 80 square miles and up until, I guess, last night, only about 30% contained. So that's not great. If you're in the way or affected by that fire, you need anything from the stand-up community, I hope that you'll join us tonight at the Hangout or make mention of it in the Discord channel, which is always active and getting more and more fun in there. Okay, well, those are the headlines that I've gathered for you today. I know it's not the most robust list, but that's what I've done. Like I told you, I'm still half-assing it, staycationing it. Although I do want to thank everybody down at the National Conservation Training Center, including my friends Steve Chase, Mark Madison, and Nate Holly, and all of the amazing people at the Student Climate Conservation Congress, or SC3, which I've been working with for years now. I think over 10 years that I've been working with that organization. The Green Schools Alliance sponsors this event that I was at the federal government facility this Friday for in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. I had a great talk with these young folks there, and I might do a panel with some of them here for the show because it was very interesting what I learned from them and hopefully what they learned from me about life and the environmental movement and media and politics. I gave a talk on Friday. That was really awesome, as always, to be with that group and those young folks. So thanks to all my friends down there who brought me back. Always a great time. Okay, well, let me just get to a few clips. A little clip show, a tiny little clip show. Let's start with, I think this is a really good clip from the governor of Kentucky on CNN. He's increasingly impressed me with his ability to communicate very effectively with his constituents, i.e. the public there in Kentucky, or some of these television journalists that get access to him and ask questions. Here's an example. 2 minutes from the governor of Kentucky. It's Andy Beshear talking to Dana Bash yesterday on State of the Union about this nonsense idea of work requirements and their supposed ability to get people, motivate people to go to work to get the least best health care insurance policy.
Governor, this law adds work requirements for Medicaid on those who are able-bodied adults. Kentucky Republican Congressman Hal Rogers says adding these requirements, quote, protects the longevity of Medicaid benefits for our most vulnerable population and adds integrity and strength to Medicaid and SNAP assistance. One of the first acts of as governor, yours, was to end Medicaid work requirements in Kentucky. Why shouldn't people who can work?
That's a dumb way to ask the question, by the way.
Well, we want everybody that can work to work. And right now in Kentucky, we have the most people working, the most jobs filled, and the largest workforce in our history. And that is with our current Medicaid structure. That's because these work requirements really aren't about getting people back to work. They are about increasing the paperwork on everybody. That's the senior, because 70% of our long-term care costs are covered by Medicaid. And that's children as well, with half of Kentucky's kids covered by Medicaid. These work requirements aren't just for specific people. Everybody else has to check all the boxes saying they're not able-bodied. And what happens is when somebody misses that one box, they are kicked off for 6 months or more.
Governor.
Meaning families have to take that parent or grandparent in. It means they have to cover all those other costs. All this is more red tape meant to kick people who should get Medicaid off of Medicaid.
Governor, I just asked that very question to the Treasury Secretary about the increase in red tape, and his response is Democrats think poor people are stupid.
It's amazing. Listen, I know a lot of people on Medicaid. These are our parents with special needs children that could have never covered it otherwise. These are busy people all working 2 jobs already to support that child. And now, if they miss a deadline, if they miss checking a box, look at what happens. I mean, you can lie all you want about what's in this bill, but the numbers are the numbers. The predictions by the Congressional Budget Office are there. It's going to devastate rural health care, all while adding trillions of dollars to our national debt, and it's going to upend every state budget across the country. You know what's sad is that while Democratic governors are speaking out, we're not speaking out because we're Democrats. We're speaking out because we're supposed to be the best governors of our states that we can be. All these Republican governors that aren't saying a thing, where their rural hospitals are going to close, where they're going to see massive layoffs and people lose their coverage, that's pretty sad. You know, our jobs is to stand up for and represent our people, and I wish people would get back to that.
Wow. Good stuff. Smart dude. Great communicator. And can't believe that Scott Bessent said working people aren't dumb. I'm not even going to play that clip for you because it's so outrageous, but I did see it. All right, this is actually good news because this is Joe Rogan realizing how bad things have gotten and talking to his audience about it in terms of the mass deportations, targeting of migrant workers. So I actually wanted to share this.
Insane. Yeah. We were told there would be no, well, there's 2 things that are insane. One is the targeting of migrant workers, not cartel members, not gang members, not drug dealers, just construction workers showing up in construction sites and raiding them, gardeners.
Yeah.
Like, really?
or Palestinian students on college campuses, or not. Like, there's a Did you see this video of this Turkish students at Tufts University that wrote an essay, and then there's a video of like ICE agents, like, I don't know.
Is that the woman?
Yeah.
What was her essay about? It was just critical of Israel, right?
Just critical of Israel. Yeah, I mean.
And that's enough to get you kicked out of the country.
There's a long history of anti-colonial activism in U.S. colleges, that led to South Africa changing and all of that. And I think this is a continuation.
All right, I don't know who that guy he's talking to is, but that was not a terrible conversation for people to be hearing on one of the most popular shows in the world. So from time to time, I like to visit clips and episodes because he's so influential, unfortunately. It matters to me. Maybe you don't think that it does, but I think that guy, unfortunately, has a lot of influence. Joe, that is. I don't know who the guy he's talking to was. Here's my Congressman Mike Lawler being asked on News Nation about the healthcare losses of healthcare of his own constituents right here in my district, that is New York 17. Let's see how he handles this.
SALT exemptions and write-offs were hugely important to your constituents. But you know as well as I that within moments of your yes vote on this, many critics were lining up. One global consultant said this afternoon, quote, Lawler is cooked. Another posted that it's estimated that more than 32,000 of your constituents will lose access to health care. Nearly 19,000 will lose food stamps. If those numbers are true, how is this bill good for the people you represent?
Well, those numbers aren't true, and that's part of the challenge here. You have Democrats intentionally lying to the American people and putting out numbers that they're making up out of thin air. The fact is, what we did in this bill on SNAP was give a 5% cost share to the states. The federal government has picked up the entirety of the SNAP program. We're asking the states like New York, that have a high error rate, by the way, because there are people collecting benefits that are not actually entitled to them, to pick up 5% of the program. In addition, when it comes to Medicaid, we put common sense reforms in place. Number one, eligibility verification.
All right, the dude is just lying, so I won't play any more of it for you, but we don't have a high percentage error rate. I wonder what that is. It's probably very, very low in the single digits, I'm guessing. Anyway, we're going to hear a lot more talking points like that. I don't want to make you dumber. I want to learn things along with you and get smarter. I don't want to learn the lies and perpetuate them necessarily. Although I do like to know what they're saying and where they're coming from. I think it's important. So I'll play them from time to time, but that's about as much as I could take from my Congressman Mike Lawler, who I do believe is cooked. Speaking of which, the Cook Political Report has moved him from this district from leaning red to, I guess it's now uncertain. It could go either way here in my district. And I play that not because of me living here, but because there's a lot of other Republican congressmen who are in a similar situation. So if we do have any kind of semblance of a free and fair election, midterm election, everybody is going to know how many people are losing or have lost health care, and a lot more about the bill by then. All right, here is a guy who I think is often wrong about economics, but he is the former Democratic Treasury Secretary of the United States of America under Obama and before that. So here he is on ABC's This Week.
I've never been as embarrassed for my country on July 4th. These higher interest rates, these cutbacks in subsidies to electricity, these reductions in the availability of housing, the fact that hospitals are going to have to take care of these people and pass on the costs to everybody else, and that's going to mean more inflation, more risk that the Fed has to raise interest rates and run the risk of recession, more stagflation. That's the risk facing every middle-class family in our country because of this bill. And for what? $1 million over 10 years to the top 0.1% of our population. Is that the highest priority use of federal money right now? I don't think so. This is a shameful act by our Congress and by our president that is going to set our country back. There is no economist anywhere without a strong political agenda who is saying that this bill is a positive for the economy. And the overwhelming view is that it is probably going to make the economy worse. Think about it this way. How long can the world's greatest debtor remain the world's greatest power? And this is piling more debt onto the economy than any piece of tax legislation in dollar terms that we have ever had.
There you go. There is Larry Summers, who, maybe since he's wrong a lot, that'll be a good thing. But he went on to say, well, this.
New York Times this week, you and Robert Rubin, who also served as Treasury Secretary, called this bill dangerous, said it poses huge risks to the economy. What are those risks?
George, just to start with, what your people have been describing is the biggest cut in the American safety net in history. The Yale Budget Lab estimates that it will kill, over 10 years, 100,000 people. That is 2,000 days of death like we've seen in Texas this weekend. In my 70 years, I've never been as embarrassed for my country on July 4th.
All right, there you go. Larry Summers on ABC's This Week being very, very clear, honest, and bold. We'll see if what he says plays out, but that's pretty dire sounding and awful. And finally, I've got a clip from MSNBC's Velshi, because our friend Tina Winsett told me I should watch it and maybe grab something from it for you. And I do what I'm told by Tina. And this is a brilliant segment. It's always a great show, Velshi, on Saturday and Sunday on MSNBC. But he invited the brilliant Steve Bannon, who I read every single day. He's one of the smartest political analysts, authors, and people I read, period, over at MSNBC. And they also had Justin Wolfers on, who you might know, the Australian economist from University of Michigan. And so I thought I would grab a little bit from that for you. Let's do it.
They've saved us from a massive tax increase, and it's not going to cost us anything.
Yeah, right. I love that analogy you're using before at the beginning of the segment. You're talking about the car lease, because I was thinking, if you went to your wife and said, guess what? Car payments are free now. Your wife would look at you like you were nuts. Right. And she would be right, because that's how math works. It's how arithmetic works. And so the fact that Republicans are playing this game is so ridiculous, but they feel like it's necessary because they realize, at least at some level, that this big mega bill is going to add trillions to the debt in the coming decades, in the coming years. And so with that in mind, they have a real political problem. This is supposed to be the deficit reduction party, the fiscal responsibility party. But of course, that's ridiculous given the fact that their record shows the opposite, and they're making it worse with this package. And so in the coming years, when we see the deficits soar, which is inevitably going to happen, we'll have to come back and return to this moment and realize that this current policy baseline is complete garbage.
Just let me ask you about this, because there are different views on the deficit, right? There's some orthodoxy that says deficits are always bad and that you should run the government like you run your household budget, which is not really accurate because you have a limited working span in your own life and the government doesn't. There are others who think there's no danger to deficits at all. You should run them up as much as you like. And the truth is somewhere probably in the middle. But for Republicans who believe that deficits are bad, they almost had to do this for their own selves to convince their constituents and themselves that we're not really running up the deficit so that wealthy people can get tax cuts.
Mate, this idea that Republicans are fiscally conservative and concerned about the deficit does cause me to chuckle a little bit. You see, if you'd been in this country maybe, 100 years ago, that might be right. But let's go back through the last 50 years of American economic history. Reagan came to power, promised big tax cuts, delivered them, promised they would pay for themselves. He blew out the budget. George W. Bush came to power, delivered big tax cuts, promised they'd pay for themselves, blew out the deficit. Donald Trump in 2017 came to power, promised big tax cuts, delivered them, promised that they would pay for themselves, blew out the budget. There has not been a fiscally conservative Republican in my lifetime. Right. If what you care about, and not everyone does, there are deep debates. I'm going to leave that up to viewers. But if what you care about, if you are a fiscal conservative, then you are not a Republican. And it's not, you're not a Republican anymore. This is not a post-Trump thing. This is the last 50 years.
Yeah. Well done. And he left out a lot because of the other major policies, including during the George W. Bush administration, like 2 wars that exploded our budget deficit and our national debt. Those were put on credit cards. So was Medicare Part D put on a credit card as well by George W. Bush. And of course, there was a lot more deficit spending from Trump, not just the tax cuts. So plenty to talk about in terms of the Republican record on that. So I'm glad I grabbed it. And Tina, thank you very much for telling me about that. Whenever you see something or hear something on a podcast or on a TV show or anywhere else that I can include in the clip show, including if it's something good, like the good stuff, I like it. Bring it. Speaking of which, here is some good stuff. This is what it sounded like when Oasis got back together over the weekend for the first time in 15 years. How about this from Cardiff, Wales? There you go. I don't know. That's not the best sounding clip of it, of course, but that made people very happy, apparently. So I mentioned it this time, reference it twice during today's opening. But now it's time to get to my guest. This is her first time on the show. I hope you've been taking note that I've been making an effort to get a lot more women on the show, and I always love to have a wide variety of different types of people joining the program to learn from. She is a professor of law at University of California Law School in San Francisco. Also, she is the founding director of an organization, the Equality Action Center. She's been described as having something approaching rock star status in her field by the New York Times Magazine. She's a scholar of social inequality and a prominent public intellectual, which begs the question why I get to talk to her. But during this conversation, she did say, I sense you're a little bit of a policy wonk type, which made me feel real smart. No, I can just talk about it for a couple minutes or a couple questions. But she's the author of 12 books, 116 academic articles in law, sociology, psychology, medical and management journals. She's the 11th most cited legal scholar, both in critical theory and employment law. So we got a big guest today who's also had 3 TED or TEDx talks, including one with over 1.3 million views. Her new book is Outclassed, How the Left Lost the Working Class and How to Win Them Back. And her critically acclaimed 2017 book, White Working Class, one of the 3 books President Biden carried dog-eared and annotated during his 2020 presidential campaign, according to the Washington Post. So she is a big get. I'm very happy to have her joining me, and I was just happy that I was able to stay in this conversation for almost an hour. I hope that you like it, and I look forward to talking to you about this and everything else tonight at our Hangout. But let's do it right now with, for the very first time ever on Stand Up, Professor Joan Williams. Professor Williams, what an honor to have you on for the first time. Really appreciate you joining me today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. So, first of all, what is your reaction to Zohran Mamdani's win in New York? What does that mean?
I think it really shows the way forward for Democrats. He was really focused, for example, on economic issues. And what I have argued is that Democrats should be laser focused on a particular theme, which is that hard work should pay off in a stable middle class life where you can afford a house, you can afford childcare, you can afford the kind of stability that middle class people seek, whether they're college grads or non-college grads. And he was very focused on the kinds of affordability issues that even college grads are now beginning to have.
You've written books, lots on gender. You've written about race and obviously economics, socioeconomics, all of it. You're an expert on all of this. It sounds like his message was similar to the message we've heard from Senator Bernie Sanders for, it seems, a generation, but certainly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the two of them out on their anti-oligarchy tour, but several other Democrats sharing that message. Critics call it socialism. Maybe it is. I don't like the word. I think it ruins everything. But in terms of what they're saying, is that similar? Obviously, they endorsed Mamdani, but they've been saying it for years. I feel like this is the argument that you make, a lot of what they say. Do you disagree with the messages that they have been making on these issues?
You know, any Democrat that goes into a red district and attracts just astonishingly large crowds has got my attention. And that's exactly what the anti-oligarchy tour did. And it's, the research shows why anti-elitist rhetoric attracts working class voters without losing support from other voters. And it goes back to exactly the Mamdani message. 70 to 86% of Americans, if you believe that, 70 to 86% of Americans believe that the rich earn too much and that everybody else earns too little, and they support government programs to fix that.
I once made an argument to the audience of a Fox News TV show hosted by Mike Huckabee. He had a live audience, Joan. And the argument I made to them, because he set me up to fail, going, Pete Dominic's a progressive before we even went live. And I said to the audience, in terms of the percentage of taxes you pay on your income, you pay way more on the actual work that you do than what many wealthy people do on the money they make from their investments. How is that fair? They all agreed. If you package the message, but it gets demagogued and demonized as, socialism, I guess. What do you do?
I think the fact is, I've been on Fox too. I think the guy's name was Steve Carter. And I introduced myself as a San Francisco progressive, and he was taken aback when he heard me talk. I think that, one of the reasons that Republicans don't want Democrats talking like this is because there's some key wedge issues between Republicans and Democrats. And if you can believe it, working class Republicans are even more supportive of raising taxes on the wealthy than Democrats are. And there's a 20-point gap between wealthy and working class Republicans on the issue of whether corporations are earning too much. So these, I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I believe that you should free people's ability to follow their dreams and their imaginations. But you know what? What's good for small business is often not what's good for big business, and vice versa. And Republicans want us to forget the difference. Democrats should be reminding us every day that often what Republicans do is good for big business, but it's not for small business. And by the way, who's going to get exemptions from the Trump tariffs, the taco tariffs? Who do you think? Big business or small business?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. Certainly, it'll be more likely big business. But even if small business got those exemptions, those things water down in supply chain and so on. So even if you got an exemptions, if you need parts, everybody gets hit.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear Joan C. Williams talk sound like a full-throated capitalist, but I feel like those words stink. I feel like they taint the conversation that we're talking about because I don't know what it means. When I think about these platforms, the policy of Zohran Mamdani or AOC, I'm just interested in the issues and what they're talking about. Sounds good to me, and I would think it sounds good to most New Yorkers or most Americans when they talk about ideas like universal pre-K. It's a winner for everybody, Joan, right? Shouldn't we focus on the policies or not? Do we lose people?
Universal pre-K is a good policy to focus on. It has been adopted in some, as you probably know, in some very red states. I think it's important to focus on some policies, but also going back to the major theme is that hard work used to pay off, and hard work doesn't pay off anymore. It doesn't pay off in a stable middle-class life. And I think that, people can call me socialist, they can call me capitalist, they can call me, I don't care. But that's the theme that I think Democrats should continue to go back to. And if once they do that, one of the things they're going to notice is that DOJ's cuts, they're cutting a lot of government programs that undergird Americans' ability to sustain that stable middle-class standard of living. They're cutting Social Security and Medicare funding. or they're cutting Social Security, Medicare personnel so that sure, you're entitled, but you can't get through to anyone.
If this was the case, if what you're saying is true, I'm sure it is, the statistics in terms of the research on folks of certain income classes and so on, how come it doesn't work to convince them something like if you cut people at the IRS, then you're going to have way, way less money coming into the government? Like, how come it doesn't convince them that when you spend money on certain government programs, when you invest in certain programs and personnel and ideas, you get way more back? Certainly that's the case at the IRS or any other agency, generally speaking. The government and government agencies have been so demonized. How can you possibly message in such a way that will convince people that it's really a great investment?
I think government programs have been demonized for a number of reasons. Partly it's what people are calling the difference between redistribution and pre-distribution. I was talking about the sky-high levels of Americans that believe that we don't have a fair labor market and that the government should help create one. That's what's called pre-distribution. But very often Democrats have focused instead on redistributive programs often that are tightly targeted to the poor. Now, if you have a program where you get benefits if you're poor, but you don't get benefits if you're just one notch above, you're going to set up a dynamic where you pit the have-a-littles against the have-nots. And that's what a lot of those means-tested programs have done. In contrast, universal programs like Social Security, that's the third rail of American politics. But I do think that the tariffs and DOGE have really present Democrats with a generational opportunity to explain to Americans that many government programs undergird their ability to stay afloat and live a life of dignity. You know what's a good example? Farm subsidies. Farm subsidies and just the ability to send your soybeans to China. That's the kind of thing that we should be focusing on. And if people call us names, that's fine. People are going to call names when they don't want you to understand that what they're doing is undercutting your ability to support your family with dignity.
Yeah, no, I don't mind name calling. I'm thinking a lot about messaging, which is, something obviously you understand a lot more about than I do. And I just feel like when we name certain things, we lose the opportunity to get through to someone to explain what this would do to make their lives better. Getting back to some of these ideas, though, and some of these issues, you didn't mention, and it's kind of new, but is immigration. A whole bunch of Americans are learning that many of the folks that they are now grabbing and removing from the country, deporting, are what we named essential workers during the pandemic. And a whole bunch of people that were certainly fine with getting rid of undocumented people who were criminals are finding out that the vast majority of them, as many of us knew, were actually hardworking folks who we depend on. And now a lot of people are learning that that's a real problem. Would you add that to the messaging, or just to the simple paradigm that people are currently learning in real time?
I think this is it's a teachable moment here. And one of the things the Democrats should be doing, and they are, is pointing out that there's been a bait and switch. Trump said he was going to get order at the border and he was going to deport criminals, and that is not what he's doing. And pointing out to people that farmers now have crops rotting in the fields. I mean, the Democrats have really struggled with farmers in recent decades. So to point out to them that we are standing up for the workers that you rely on, farmers. And the other thing that's really important, small business is really cherished by non-college voters. And that's because owning a small business is the best hope many of them have to moving from being an order taker to being an order giver and an owner. And so to point out how these completely out of control deportations are hurting small businesses and depriving them of workers that they need to survive. The other thing that Democrats should talk a lot more about is that, who are these immigrants? Often they are working class people with working class values, faith, family, community, just the kind of values that are held by the non-college voters that Democrats have struggled with so much. Instead, I hear a lot of talk about there's disappearances, and when one person is, one group has disappeared, they're coming from you. And I understand that that's rhetoric that we inherited from World War II, and it's very resonant for some people. I mean, my mom was Jewish. I understand how that's very resonant for many, many people, but it's not resonant for the non-college voters, many of them who Democrats need to lure back a lot more of.
I'm really excited to be talking to you. You've been studying this and writing about these issues for a long time. And so sorry to, ask you a question that I probably should know the answer to, but I'm going to get read up and become a Joan C. Williams expert and talk to you again. But I do want to get your diagnosis on how we got here. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of wanted to point to Obama, going from Obama to Trump and that election. I mean, you talked a lot about and wrote a lot about that at the time. And I'm still not quite sure of what your analysis is of what happened there. I mean, did Obama lose working class voters? And if so, why would they go to a guy who lives in a golden mansion?
No, Obama did a great job connecting with the white working class in the heartland for a very simple reason. He was brought up by his grandparents for substantial periods, who were white people from Kansas. Obama knew how to talk to people. Now, he did have some bloopers, like clinging to goods and religion. He said that was my biggest bonehead move, but he did a great job. But what happened is, in short, the one word for it is neoliberalism, that Democrats were very focused on, frankly, white working class men, and they were the center of Democrats' coalition in the decades after World War II. And then my generation of hippies came up, and we were much more focused on environmentalism and various racial and gender projects that have formed my life work, frankly. And I think it's not so simple as to say we just need to go back to the post-World War II coalition, because I actually care about those gender and racial equality projects, but I don't think we need to choose. We definitely don't need to choose, because one of the things that we saw in the last election is that non-college people of color have veered away from Democrats by 32 points since 2012. Non-college white people did long ago, but non-college people of color have now joined them in significant numbers. And 2/3 of Americans don't have college degrees. You cannot build a winning electoral coalition if you are losing voters who are not college grads.
All that being said, I would argue, tell me I'm wrong, that there have been no Republican policies that would help working class Americans advance in education, in healthcare, in employment, in investment, in other protections. You talk about neoliberalism as being the catalyst. I get it, certainly when it comes to things like trade policy and trade agreements and tax policy. But Democrats, for years, as long as I've been covering politics, and I'm 49 years old, I've been doing about 15 years, but certainly the Obama coalition and more, advocating for environmental issues, of course, and things like that you mentioned, but also for policies that would benefit working class Americans, like expanded access to health care, like tax policies that would be far more equitable for those Americans, like education and student loan relief. All those policies were proposed by Democrats and not Republicans. Like, I can't think of one policy outside of, I think, like the child tax care credit, which Democrats used and worked, and I think cut child poverty in half until Republicans said they didn't like it anymore. What do I have wrong about that history?
I think there's nothing wrong with your history. You're a Democrat talking to a Democrat. I think the Democrats do better for working people. I don't think they've done good enough for working people for a simple reason. Virtually every American used to earn more than their parents. And among people born in 1980, only half will. So people in the middle, not people who are in low income or people who are rich, but people in the middle feel that both parties have failed them for a simple reason. Both parties have failed to support their ability to sustain a steady middle class life. And that's because, if wages had continued to rise when productivity did, like they did after World War II, wages would be 43% higher than they are today. And for the 15 years before Trump was elected the first time, virtually all of the net job growth, virtually all, was in gig work and temporary jobs. And so that's why people are very, very angry. And what Republicans do, and Trump is a genius at this.
Sullivan, yeah.
Is he connects with that economic anger and he channels it. Now, he connects with that economic anger and he channels it against cultural elites, against the top 20%, against college grads, against professionals. And he channels that anger away from the economic elites who stole these folks' future. So the move for the left just seems to me to be so clear. We need to connect with that economic anger, acknowledge that it's legitimate anger, and redirect it against the economic elites that have produced this sorry situation.
I mean, I fully agree with all that, but just to break it down, given one idea or one argument, one policy, the thing that's so frustrating to me is that it's so hard for politicians and Democrats and government to tell people the good things that they've done. And I've seen them try to do it. But specifically, I would look at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was the government agency spearheaded by now Senator Elizabeth Warren before she became senator. And Barack Obama. That idea wasn't a perfect solution, but it was created as a result of the financial industry destroying the economy with deregulation. The CFPB was created to protect Americans, not only from the financial, from the big banks, but from all kinds of different scams and frauds. And it was working and doing a great job. But Republicans did a great job at scapegoating like poor black people for buying homes they couldn't afford, as opposed to diagnosing the actual problem. In fact, when they did the autopsy on it, the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission banned words like deregulation and credit default swaps. They banned the words that were the causes of the actual problems. And they do that with other things like climate change. They ban all kinds of words that are the problems. How do you combat that? And how do you tout your successes when you actually have them, like the example I'm giving?
Well, I mean, the easiest way to explain this at this particular moment in time is that Democrats are focused on defense of democracy. Defense of democracy was one of the top issues that Kamala Harris stressed.
Right.
And to this day, I don't know about your crowd, but my crowd, that's all they can talk about. And I think it's really important, and I'm very upset at what's happening in this country. And I think we need to defend democracy. But what we need to do to defend democracy in the long term is really different from what we need to do to defend democracy in the short term. In the short term, we need resistance. We need resistance in Congress, on the streets, in the courts. But in the long term, we need to recognize that non-college voters are not, Trump voters, defense of democracy was way, way down for them in their list of priorities. Inflation and the economy were number one and number two. And guess who was talking about inflation and the economy? Now, Trump was lying, don't get me wrong, but he was talking about it. He was connecting with people where they were about the issues that were their highest priority. Whereas we were talking about the defense of democracy, and they feel like democracy failed them. And so for us, for Democrats, it's not a good look right now to be seen as defenders of the status quo. And you know who it's going to help? It's going to help the far right.
How does defending the status quo help the far right?
If Democrats are seen as defending the status quo that failed non-college Americans as they were losing touch with the American dream, then we're going to continue to lose elections. I mean, there's also more of I sense a few policy wonk genes in you. So let me talk policy for just a minute. The kinds of economic policies that very often Democrats bring forward, think of, again, Kamala Harris, and again, what's happened is part of a much longer arc. But just as an example, $25,000 for housing. That is a government redistribution program. Right. That is not creating a fair labor market. So that's a misconnect right there. Think about the other things that she really focused on, or that Democrats often focus on. Think about raising the minimum wage. Now, I am super passionate about raising the minimum wage because I've worked on issues related to poverty. That's super important for poor people. But you know what? For these middle status voters who are Trump's base, the minimum wage is what they're trying to avoid. They're not interested in raises the minimum wage. It doesn't connect with them. Paid leave. Paid leave is something I feel passionately about. Really, I've worked for it for decades. But if you don't have a stable middle-class job, if you're stuck in gig work, if you're just trying to get by, if you're patching together 3 part-time jobs, paid leave doesn't seem like the highest priority for you. And so a lot of the economic policies that Democrats talk about don't connect with the middle status voters that are flocking to the far right in Europe as well as the United States.
That's a good point about Europe as well. But the other issue that we haven't really talked about, but I feel like it's always the issue, and maybe you don't, and you're the scholar, you've written a lot about this, but Joan, I think that race is everything. I think it's beyond everything. I think Trump has blamed so much. I mean, he made up all kinds of crazy shit. Haitians are eating your cats and dogs. I mean, he has blamed so much on black and brown people, and so have Republicans forever scapegoating them. To me, every policy we talk about, this is an argument I think I probably will die on this hill, that everything comes back to race for conservative Republicans, and including for plenty of liberal Democrats who don't show up and stand side by side with me at school board meetings and so on because they're comfortable. They don't go to protests because they're comfortable. And while they, rhetorically would like to advocate for black and brown folks and believe in human and civil rights, they're not going to change too much about our, upper middle class, liberal, suburban lifestyle. So I feel like race underpins anything. Tell me I'm wrong.
I've studied racism in organizations for 15 years, and I've never seen an organization where race wasn't structuring who got the good work, who didn't get the good work, who was seen as a good worker, who wasn't seen as a good worker. Racism is really, really important in organizations. It's really important in politics, but we have to understand the role that it's playing. If you are a racist, you are voting for Trump. I'm simplifying the math somewhat, but that's basically what the math shows. But the math also shows that that's not why he keeps winning. Because that's not a large enough vote share to win. Well, thank the Lord. Thank the Lord. And so he's winning because he also attracts a much larger group of voters. And according to some studies, these voters' attitudes don't differ, racial attitudes, they don't differ from those of non-Trump voters. Those are the voters that we need to focus on as Democrats.
I think a statistic that would illustrate your point is that more black and brown folks voted for Trump this time than last time. But in that case, I would say that there's a lot of black and brown racist people. Black folks can uphold white supremacy and women can uphold patriarchy, as you, I'm sure, agree with. But I mean, in that case, it would seem like they were scapegoating like trans kids, for which there's like 2 of them. And it animated a lot of black and brown folks in my town not to show up for the school board. And another, what do you think about why those folks voted for Trump this time around where they didn't last time? You got more of vote, and mostly male, right? I think mostly men.
Mostly male. Yeah.
Isn't that
yeah?
racist?
As I mentioned at the top that since 2012, there's been a 32-point shift away from Democrats among non-college voters of color. I think that, one of the things that always amazes me is that we don't think that if something is about race, that means it's not about gender. But we do think that if something's about race, that's not about class. It's about both. And one of the, not the only, but a strong reason you saw a sharp shift towards Trump among men of color was because Trump enacts a very established form of non-elite masculinity. It's called bad but bold.
Right.
I think it was Kanye West who said, I love Trump because he has dragon energy. That may be a slightly misquote, but the dragon energy was there. It's a certain form of masculinity. Right. Again, Trump is a genius at connecting with people. And, the research shows that when men's masculinity is threatened, they tend to double down on masculinity. And when men can no longer be providers, their masculinity is threatened.
Oh, don't get me started on that. Yeah. I think that's a huge.
I have to convince you on that one. So when you have not only the poor men, but middle class men who can't provide for their families, their masculinity is being threatened. And one of the ways to show just how macho they are is by voting for Mr. Macho. And that includes white men and that includes men of color.
Weird definition of masculinity and macho that we have in this country, that we would ever afford it to a guy who's none of those things, really, just a good talk.
Well, that's the beauty of taco tariffs, by the way. I mean, why aren't we doing more? Trump always chickens out taco tariffs. It drives him nutsy. When somebody asked him about it in a press conference, he really got upset. Why are we allowing Trump to claim that he's Mr. Macho? Because I agree with you, he's not.
Well, I'm always trying to push back on that idea and always really engage in the conversation about men and masculinity in this country and elsewhere. Let me go back to the earlier point you made, though, in terms of in our circles, yes, everybody, Kamala Harris, the campaign, talking about saving democracy. But and I was one of those people too, but what I didn't realize, I suppose, is that I overestimated voters and Americans' understanding of civics and history. And I'm not going to say Americans are dumb, because I think that cheapens it. I used to say that kind of thing, but I think it's lazy. I myself don't have a college degree. I think intelligence is measured in all kinds of weird ways, and we should redefine it. And I think the guy who I think is really dumb about politics is very smart about fixing HVAC in a way that I would never know. So I think it's cheap and I think it's shorthanded. That being said, democracy never put any food on anybody's table, but unions and collective bargaining did. And working class folks know the benefits of organizing and organized labor. And the only argument against it for working class folks is, again, racism. I'll never forget the CNN analyst who I was talking to, who I had a lot of respect for. I said, why would a white union member vote for Mitt Romney? And he said, because Barack Obama's black. Do I have it wrong? I mean, isn't collective bargaining a pretty simple idea for any working class folk to understand that they at least want to have the right and access to that idea?
Well, I think you're dead right that, and I'm so glad to say that you used to be a little freer with calling people stupid. As someone who has degrees from Yale, Harvard, and MIT, there are a lot of people. It's like I've met the people who run the world, and that's why we're where we are. So just saying.
I hear you.
But this idea that of calling people stupid, that is what fuels far right populism. Because left populism is what I've been trying to do here. They're robbing you blind. Right populism is they're looking down on you. So we need to stop calling people stupid, for sure. I've forgotten where else I was going with that. Maybe you'll remind me.
I think it's an important point, and I'm glad that you're picking up on that. I was talking about the collective bargaining. Why then don't people?
Oh, you know what? Oh, I wanted to share with you. I was just reading the coolest study that measures, yeah, exactly, the divergence between support for big business and support for unions, and it's the largest. I think, if I remember correctly, it's the largest that's ever been measured. The support for unions in the United States has skyrocketed from being kind of low to being pretty peachy right now. And that's because American workers realize they've gotten screwed. And they have gotten screwed. And they realize that one of the key ways to increase their power is to band together in unions. Now, unions aren't perfect. Religion isn't perfect. Neither are you, and neither am I. Perfect ain't on offer in this fallen world. But unions, although they're not perfect, are absolutely vital.
I mean, but if that's the case, and unions are becoming more popular, and you can measure such things, obviously. I mean, I remember being on CNN and pointing to a graph on TV. Correlation isn't necessarily causation, but income inequality went down as union membership went down. I mean, it has to have a huge part to do with it. But if what you're saying is true, and obviously it is, the states that are conservative, the red states, they're anti-union. They call themselves right to work. I call them right to work for less states, but they're overwhelmingly anti-union in those states. They'll do anything they can to prevent a union from forming at the Toyota plant in Alabama or whatever other.
Who's the they? Who's the they? Well, those southern states are anti-union, and that's one of the reasons why manufacturing jobs in the United States moved from the formerly industrialized Midwest to the South. So I think I think, as I say, I can't remember what the statistic is right now. I think 70% of Americans are pro-union, and I would suspect that the support is less dense in the South, but there has to be a lot of union support in the South to have a number that high.
I mean, the private sector is different than the public sector in terms of unions, obviously, but I mean, like teachers, they've been unionized.
The merchant right is really, really good at frightening workers and saying to them, if you have unions come in here, we are going to make sure you lose your jobs. Absolutely. I don't say that's, I don't fault the workers for that. I fault us for having a system that allows big money to threaten people like that.
That's a good point, a fair point for sure, the system. But I also always come back to the world that I've come up in, media. And media so often dominates on the right and demonizes any kind of progressive policy to the point where, obviously, you've written about this and so have others. People vote against policies that would benefit them and their families every election.
I think we really have to. I mean, I really resist the voters are duped narrative, because I think that's one of the ways that we send the message to people that we are cultural elites who think you're stupid. We are cultural elites who are looking down on you. I think these people are as smart as I ever was. They're dealing with very different lives. blue-collar lives have blue-collar assumptions and blue-collar truths and blue-collar pleasures, and they're quite different from my life. But I don't think that they make sense in their lives just the way my truths make sense in my life.
Now we'll have to pick up here. I'll make this one argument and then I'll let you go because I've taken you way over time. But I think we disagree here. And it's my media point. Again, not saying they're stupid, but I will tell you this. I'll give you one example. I'm white. I live in an upper middle class, Rockland County, just north of New York City. And we can talk about socioeconomics and so on. But my generation of Americans, white liberals even, forget about conservatives, white liberals, are freaking terrified of things like kidnapping and crime. And when you say what you said about, I'm not going to tell them that what they're seeing or feeling isn't true, I am. I'm going to tell you right now to any one of my liberal or conservative neighbors, we live in the safest place in America. But they believe, Joan, that there are all kinds of violent crimes being committed, but they aren't. They aren't. They don't even know anybody who knows anybody, even anecdotally, who's had their kid kidnapped, yet they won't let their kids out of their sight. The reason for that is because they are told, in this case by conservatives, that crime in your district is terrible and will save you. It's not. It's literally the safest place to live, one of the safest neighborhoods in communities in the country, and my neighbors think it's dangerous. How do you square that?
I think I think that some of your, I actually write about this in my book. I grew up partly in Venezuela, and my image from when I was a kid in Venezuela is of a concrete wall with broken glass on the top. And when I came home to the United States and looked at New England with short white picket fences, what I thought is, if you want a safe society, don't tolerate high levels of inequality, because that's what that tall fence with broken glass on the top represented. We have had sharp increases in inequality, and as a result, we've had sharp increases in felt insecurity. That is, if you don't like the feeling of insecurity, get rid of the feeling of inequality, or get rid of the reality of inequality. So I think that what you've talked about, this sense that there's threats lurking outside the door, is an impact on elites of the kind of growth of inequality that we've been talking about, and its impact. We've been talking about its impacts on non-elites, but this is one of its impacts on elites. It sucks. We should address the inequality.
I think that's the root cause. But I still don't think it's answering my question. Why do my neighbors not want to let their kids go out in the safest neighborhood in the country where nobody they know has had any problems? My neighbors won't let their kids go to New York City, which is also almost as safe as it's always been. I say to them, making fun of them, and this is what I shouldn't do, but I've said to people, I'm like, you know that there are kids that live in New York City, right? You know there are kids that live in the city and have and
they're not dead.
And they're not getting pushed on the subway. That's what I heard. I don't want to let my kid go to New York City and ride the subway. She'll get pushed on the subway. Like, I mean, I don't know.
I tell you, it's a cultural thing. And I think you're talking about upper middle class people. If you're not, I mean, that's different. The other thing you're pushing, which I think is really important, we probably don't have time to talk to, is, social media. And the media and the news environment is making everything much worse.
For sure.
And this is a really good example.
Well, that's my point. But I was actually thinking of traditional media demagoguing and demonizing, all kinds of things that don't need to be, or just straight up lying about things. Donald Trump is saying we need more clean coal. Like, how come people think that's how come you could think? I will say that if you think burning coal is good for you, then I don't want to say you're dumb, but like, get a piece of coal. Get a piece of coal. Put it in your hand.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned climate change a couple times. Climate change is the third highest priority for college grads, and God knows it's high for me. But for the average American, it's 17th. And there's a very simple reason for that has nothing to do with whether people are smart or stupid. It's because these fragile and failing middle-class families, they're worried about the end of the month, not the end of the year.
I think
Again, you have to look at it from their point of view.
I think that's a great point, but I'll criticize young people too, because I work in this space with young people, and obviously the ones that are really focused on it, I'm not talking about. But if you go up to your average 17, 20-year-old, which is the ages of my daughter, and I've raised them to be radical environmentalists, and yet still I'm not sure that my daughters will make a shared sacrifice. They want to fight climate change, but not if it costs them anything. I would argue young people are no different than the rest of us on that issue. And my last question is my favorite question of the month. I feel like every once in a while I come to an interesting conclusion to ask the smart people I get access to. It's this. In your life and in your career, when was the last time you saw Americans make a shared sacrifice? Doing something for the greater good that means they might have a little bit less or a little bit of discomfort. My argument is there hasn't been anything in this country since World War II. And my evidence for it is during COVID, people wouldn't even wear a mask. They wouldn't even stay 6 feet. They thought they were if you think you're being inconvenienced in any way, even though this person might die, you're not changing it. I wish I was wrong. Am I?
Well, I don't see it the same way. I mean, we could talk about masks and masculinity. We don't have time, but that's another thing that's about. But I see people behaving in selfless ways every day. And for a very simple reason, I've developed a dairy allergy. You know, many Ashkenazi Jews have a dairy allergy. So I've developed a dairy allergy. Oh. And I go to airports. I go all over and talk to people. And I know, again, because I've studied poverty, I mean, these people are earning like $7.50 to maybe $18 an hour. And they are so kind to me. They are so mindful about whether they're going to give me something that is going to make me sick. And, you know, I earn so many multiples of what they earn, and they treat me with such grace. And I think there's a lot of grace that we see every day that we don't notice.
I fully agree with you, and I'm
You don't think that's solidarity? Solidarity with a fellow human being?
Solidarity with a fellow human being is not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is a community shared sacrifice where everybody in your town or your state or your country says, I agree, let's do this policy for the greater good. I absolutely think on an individual basis, people are wonderful and beautiful. And I'm so glad to hear that that is your experience. I certainly think that that's wonderful. And I'm sorry you can't have cheese. Does it really mean you can't have cheese or just like you can't have a glass of milk?
Oh, can't even have croissant.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joan.
I mean, the levels of oppression that we have to deal with.
Well, your pronunciation of croissant is really showing your elitism as well.
It all, right? I do think, I mean, there is research, and unfortunately you've discovered I'm a person who can talk for basically ever, so you can cut me off anytime you want. But there's research that shows that there's a very specific group of Americans that is extremely highly individualistic and not very communal. Yeah. And that is elite people. That is elite people. Working class people, blue collar people are lower in individualism and much higher in solidarity and community spiritedness than the elites are.
I think
we just haven't tapped it. We haven't tapped it.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
That's one of the reasons people like Trump rallies. They're fun. 70% of Trump voters think he's fun. God bless him. And it's a way they feel they're joining a community where their angers are being named and they all care passionately about the same thing.
And the same is true for my community around the podcast. The same is true for all of these rallies that I've been going to. The same feeling is true. You show up and you have a sense of solidarity.
The No Kings rallies. Yeah.
There's the same sense of solidarity where you feel like you're on the same planet as other people. And you're reminded of your morality and
yet there has been a corrosion in solidarity. And I'll just give you one last story. Sure. A friend of mine lives in Iowa City, And they've had terrible flooding in Iowa City. They had terrible flooding, I don't know, quite a while back, maybe 15 years ago. I'm probably getting the dates wrong. And she said everybody was there and they were all passing sandbags and the whole community was there. And then in the more recent floods in Iowa City, some very rich people hired people to sandbag their properties, of course, creating worse situations for everybody downstream. And you're right, there has been a corrosion of what we owe to each other. I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep talking to you about that and everything else. Today, I'm very excited and very grateful that I got to connect with you for the first time, and I hope that we can do it again. This is a really interesting conversation, and talking to an author, journalist, scholar like yourself about these issues that you've been writing and talking about your whole career, and the way that you talk about them. I think we have chemistry, Joan.
I think we do. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thanks for the invitation.
Good. We'll talk again soon.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. There she goes, Joan C. Williams. I hope that you enjoyed that and learned something from it the way I did, and hopefully she agrees with the whole we had chemistry thing. And we'll come back. You can follow her. She's still on Twitter and posting over there, as well as, well, she's moved mostly to Blue Sky, I should say. Joan is on Blue Sky. If you want to let her know that you heard her here, that would be great. EqualityActionCenter.org if you want to learn more about the work that she's doing there. Watch her TED Talks, and most importantly, get her new books. Good stuff. Great stuff from Joan Williams. Thank you very much for listening today. I hope to see you tonight at our hangout at 8 p.m. East. Look forward to that. If you're a stand-up subscriber, you'll be getting a link to meet us there. Join us in the Discord platform as well, where every day Megan, our friend Megan here in New York, is posting a kind of a question of the day, which we love. I love answering the question of the day, which I haven't done the last couple of days. I'm going to head over and do that in the Discord platform right now. Daily Questions is what it's labeled. And today's is, when you read, do you take notes? Do you stop to look things up? Which I love, and that's yes is my answer. Whether it is a book that is in any way kind of self-help or spiritual stuff that I read, philosophical stuff that I read, or if it's some kind of book like Joan Williams there, or any of the books I read for the show, I do. I stop. And not only do I take notes and put voice notes in, but I highlight things, I dog ear pages, I underline, I do it all. Sometimes I do it in the opening, like in the margins of the pages themselves, or in the first page of the book. I leave notes and page numbers. So that's my long-winded answer. I'll go answer it now on the Discord, and I hope that you will as well, because there's such great questions that Megan is posting pretty much every day there. Would you rather be the funniest or smartest person in the room? Oh, God, that's an easy one for me. Both. Funniest. All right, folks, thank you very much for listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow, and go download John's album. Go listen to Pops on Hops. He's got Pete Coe on it, as a matter of fact, and I've got to play a clip from that for you. I'll remember to do it on tomorrow's show. Sorry, Barry. Sorry, Abigail. Sorry, Pete. I love to promote your work as well. So that's it. That's all I've got. I'll talk to you tomorrow or tonight. Bye-bye.